Hi, this is Professor Olivetti. Today we're going to look at how the church is the body of Christ. Now, this is the fourth action in the series of actions that Lofink has identified with the church. So remember, we started here with how the church exodus is, right? How it leaves and forms a new community, and then how the church gathers, right? How it comes together as the people of God. Of course, this is a choice, right? An act of the free will. Then he talked about how the church remembers, and we looked at Romans 9 and 11, where Paul said that all of Israel will be saved. Right? What we're going to look at today is a kind of remembering, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at scriptures to see how the church is called to be the body of Christ in the world today, or to see how the church can choose to be the body of Christ in the world today. Now, this involves gathering. If we look back at St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, this sets up this whole explanation of what it means to be Christ's body in the world today, what it means to be the church. So remember when the risen Christ suddenly departed from the disciples in Luke and Acts, and they weren't upset, right? They were inspired. So Lofink said that this is because they realized that Christ would always be with them somehow, and now they were being included in his mission. They were to be God's body on earth. So they didn't miss Christ anymore because he was always among them and within their assembly when they gathered together, right? And when they participated in his mission to bring glad tidings to the poor and proclaim liberty to captives. Now, this church in the latter half of the first century, the church that Paul had founded in Corinth, a Greek city in the Roman Empire, they were not gathering as a body of Christ. Right? As a matter of fact, they were all broken up into divisions. Right? And he says when they met for the early Eucharist, the Lord's Supper, one person would eat a whole bunch of food and get stuffed, and someone else would not have any food at all. Some people would drink all of the blood of Christ, and some people wouldn't get any at all. So there's a good chance that this division was according to class division or other kinds of ethnic or social affiliations. So it might have been, for example, that the poorer members of the church who had to work on the Lord's Day, when they got off work and were able to come to the gathering, when they were able to come to Eucharist assembly, the food was already gone. Right? That's the kind of scenario they're saying was this is likely the cause of how this played out. But we're also told by Paul that there's other divisions that were happening. People were dividing on who baptized them, right? Paul or other Christian missionaries like Apollos was another guy who had baptized some people in this church. So various reasons, but they were dividing up, and they weren't treating the meal as a common meal, right? I mean, that was the whole point in the book of Luke. Remember, in the Gospel according to Luke, the whole point was that Christ ate with everyone: Pharisees, sinners, tax collectors. Um, People were excluded because of their actions. People were excluded because of their ethnicity. People were excluded because of their illness or their disability. People were excluded for various social reasons. He ate with all of them, and it was always scandalous, right, that he included them. So Paul's going to tell them now for us, it's in some ways scandalous that we don't include each other. And he calls them out on it. He says, listen, you guys are coming here and eating and drinking, and you're not doing it together. Each is going ahead with his own supper. One gets hungry while one goes hungry while another one gets drunk. He says, just eat in your own houses. Don't you have your own houses? Just eat, right? Eat there. And this is the point where the Eucharist goes from a meal, like a full meal. In the early church, they ate a full meal with the body and blood of Christ. Right? And now they just say no. Paul says, well, don't do the whole meal. Just do the bread and the wine transformed into the body and blood of Christ. So again, he's kind of scolding them here. He says, do you show contempt for the church of God and make those who have nothing feel ashamed? Right? So there's a likely scenario that the poor are not given their fair share, or not given a full sharing in the meal. What can I say to you? Shall I praise you? In this matter, I do not praise you, right? He's telling you, you're doing it all wrong. And so then he explains to them what the Eucharist means. And so he recites them the words of institution. You could see that this is something that was handed on, word for word, the way that it is in several of the New Testament texts. This is my body that is for you. Do this in remembrance of me, right? This is what Jesus says after he takes the bread and he breaks it and gives thanks. And then also he takes the cup and said, this is the cup of the covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. So Paul says, whoever eats this bread and drinks of the cup of the Lord unworthily will have to answer for the body and the blood of the Lord, right? A person should examine himself and so eat the bread and drink the cup. For anyone who eats and drinks without discerning the body eats and drinks judgment on himself. So what does it mean, discerning the body? What is the body? Well, the body of Christ is the assembly. It's all the baptized Christians. And if you're not eating together with them all, if you're not doing this in common, then you're not doing the Eucharist. You're not remembering Christ, right? And in a way, you're passing a judgment on yourself because you're not taking the time to understand what this ritual means. It means that we're all united as one. It's like in the sacrament of marriage, where the vows say for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, right? As long as you both may live. The same thing in the Eucharist. We're saying we accept each and every person who eats of this body and drinks of this blood as our equal, as our family member, as a beloved one. And so if you eat the Eucharist and then you go out and don't include other people, especially those who are eating that Eucharist, participating in that same ritual with you, who have chosen to be part of Christ's body here on earth, well, then you're kind of lying. You're kind of making the judgment on yourself because you're saying, here I go, I'm going to unite myself to all these other people, but I'm going to exclude them. You can't do it, right? It'd be like us as Catholics, like having a exclusionary view to people from other parts of the world, especially if they're Catholic, right? Now, on this deepest level, of course, this extends to all people, but on the most obvious levels, we can see how quite specifically, hypocritical that is. If I were to take the communion, but then, judge or exclude, or not want to share something in my life with someone else who's taking the same communion, someone else who's dedicating themselves to be the body of Christ too. So we looked at the ideal communion in Acts. Remember what they did? They shared everything. They shared the Lord's Supper. They shared the faith of the apostles, and they shared their material stuff. And so Paul's saying, hey, it all goes together. You have to discern the body. You have to recognize yourself as part of the larger whole. So how does that work? Well, Paul goes on to say, with this body of Christ, right? What is it? As a body is one, though it's made of many parts, and all the parts of the body, though many, are one body, so also Christ. For in one Spirit, we're all baptized into one body. Jews or Greeks, right? Talk about any ethnic group, slaves or free person, any social class, right? So if we're talking about people from another country, people from a different socioeconomic class, right? Whoever they are, they're part of us. They're part of the same body we are, Christ's body. And we are all given to drink of the one Spirit. Now you are Christ's body and individually parts of it. That's the discernment. That's the recognition that I, you, them, all of us are not existing as separate individuals, but a community of loving persons, the body of Christ.